May Allah's peace, mercy, and blessings be upon you. We know that every thinker who has put forward a fundamental doctrine has a unique language, terminology, foundational concepts, and by starting from these basic concepts, we discover the thinker's world of thoughts. Additionally, we better understand the thesis proposed by that thinker. Kant can be given as an example. For instance, if we want to know Kant's world of thought, we naturally need to be familiar with many fundamental concepts like a priori, a posteriori, and transcendental. Many other examples could be given. If we want to introduce theology in this regard, within history, words in this field, we must refer to many thinkers and benefit from their ideas. However, we will mainly attempt to focus on Heydar Jamal's fundamental concepts and ideas. We need to know the basic concepts and methods he used to describe reality. In this regard, when describing the anatomy of reality, we must also speak about a crisis point, paradoxically brought about by the impossible within that reality. That is, as you generally see on the board, the crisis of reality we will discuss. As you can see here, through the Witness Act, the impossible, the emergence of the impossible paradoxically affirming itself within reality and creating a crisis is, in fact, a metaphysical scandal. When discussing such a metaphysical scandal, we must first be aware of these concepts. That is, what metaphysics is, what reality is, and such many terms. We must grasp the essence. When we speak of reality, we refer to the hierarchy of possibilities, the potentialities. We are talking about the ultimate truth behind everything. Thus, as the ultimate truth behind concrete transient things and realities, reality is actually something formed within possibilities. Within these possibilities, the impossibility of the act of witnessing taking place in itself is a metaphysical scandal. In general, throughout history, there have been various approaches related to the description of reality. However, generally, we can express the three main approaches that humanity has presented as worldviews. These are metaphysics, philosophy, and theology. In this video, since we are introducing theology and describing reality from a theological worldview, we will primarily proceed from this perspective and stand on this position. What theology is not, it should be expressed first. That is, we note that theology is not metaphysics and not philosophy. If we are talking about philosophy, we should note that Aristotle, at the same time, three theological worldview, theologically of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. It has had a great influence in its formation. In Judaism, Maimonides has a significant impact. Influenced by Aristotle, regarding Christianity, it should be noted that it emerged with Aquinas Aliforma, and the scholastic theological approach formed by aligning Aristotle's categories with the words of the Holy Fathers existed. Due to the need to respond to the problems posed by Greek philosophy, certain influences also occurred in Islam, generally in Islamic geography, especially after the Mongol invasion. The main understanding when theology is mentioned is certain legal opinions on the issue or explanations regarding questions related to religious rituals. From this perspective, when discussing theology, we should not rely on other sources of knowledge like metaphysics or philosophy, but should refer specifically to revelation when addressing theology. Let's start with answering the question of what metaphysics is. Metaphysics means the initial concept of infinity. According to the metaphysical worldview, a person starts from the idea that their initial experience is an experience about infinity. According to many philosophers, infinity is not something that can be obtained through experience. In the scientific understanding, it is also the case that we can learn concrete finite things through observation and experience. However, The concept of infinity is not obtained from experience. On the contrary, according to the metaphysical worldview, a person's initial, most fundamental primitive perception is related to the experience of infinity. As an example, a young child chasing a butterfly in the garden. Let's think the child is in harmony with his surroundings and nature. That is, when he runs after the butterfly and wants to catch it, he doesn't feel any difference between himself and his surroundings. It's as if, like the trees, butterfly, stones, and other things around, the child is also one of those living beings. It is one of these things, and while chasing the butterfly, no distinction, that is, no difference is felt between himself and his surroundings. However, if the child's foot trips over a stone or his knee gets scraped, the child starts to cry, and suddenly the surroundings seem hostile to him. It becomes visible. So already a difference emerges. In the initial fundamental perception, there was a sense of being in harmony with infinity. However, the first tragedy, that difference caused it to arise. Thus, according to metaphysicians and mystics, the initial primitive experience that comes before other experiences is the perception of infinity. Apart from the child, this experience is also significant for priests, mystics, gurus, namely those aspiring to become perfect individuals. And according to this worldview, the general conclusion is that there is nothing finite, concrete, or ephemeral. Ultimately, everything is identical with infinity. The finite is a transient, ephemeral display. We can see this as a wave leading to eternity. The main accepted thing is not this transient, finite, fleeting thing, meaning these concrete, passing things. This is considered a level of perfection leading to the comprehension of infinity. Earlier, we mentioned that these saints also achieved this perfection, are those who claim to be so. Thus, according to mystics and metaphysicians, the primary experience that precedes other experiences is the perception of infinity. The final conclusion reached is that finite, concrete things ultimately align with the infinite, and as noted here, finite things are with the infinite. It becomes identical with it, that is, it ceases to exist within it, within that infinity. As an example of this metaphysical worldview, we can give the example of the ocean and wave or drop, where a wave of the infinite ocean is transient, the wave forms and then disappears within the ocean. However, the ocean itself is infinite, that is, the wave is within the ocean, it forms harmony with the ocean, and at the same time, a drop, there is also no separate drop, there is no definite finite drop, because in the end that drop disappears within the ocean. Expressing the finite in the infinite is identifying with infinity. Philosophy, however, says the exact opposite. Philosophy seeks to attain infinity, the ultimate truth, by turning to something finite and specific. The primary task of philosophy is infinity, to bring it down to earth, to express it with concrete worldly things is, as an example, the early philosophers can be mentioned. For instance, Thales said that the foundation of everything is water. Stands. Some other philosophers said fire, some said air. They turn to something specific that we can observe and experience, but this specific thing is actually elusive and immeasurable. By turning to this specific thing, they were trying to express the entire infinite truth in it. Philosophy talks about expressing the infinite with a concrete, finite thing. Even modern philosophers use certain terminology in their concepts, certain concrete. They try to express their worldview with theses. According to the philosophical worldview, if we are able to grasp, explore, and obtain this world we are in the end, we have also found and obtained the ultimate truth. We become, that is, we express the infinite with the finite concrete. That is, whether the finite expresses infinity or the infinite is expressed with the finite. In any case, we are talking about identity. Even though philosophy and metaphysics differ in method, they ultimately arrive at the same point. Thus, whether the finite is infinite, when we express it so that the finite is identical with the infinite, or we express the infinite in finite concrete things. That is, let's base it on the philosophical worldview. In both cases, we arrive at identity, meaning both metaphysics and philosophy. Both of these are doctrines of identity and are immanent, meaning within a framework of perception, finds its confirmation. theology is related to the emergence of revelation. Since theology is connected to revelation, it relates to the unseen that is tied to the divine revelation, and in this respect, as noted on the board, is a non-identity doctrine and is transcendent. The foundation of theology's non-identity doctrine is that we, in witnessing people, an active point of discrepancy does not align with ontology, that is, with the predicate of existence. Through this point of discrepancy, it does not come to an analogy with anything around it. It is equally distant from every specific thing and is not a stone among stones. Let me note that to understand the metaphysical worldview, we need to discuss various occult, esoteric ancient books. For example, in Hermes Trismegistus's book Corpus Hermeticum, it is mentioned that what is above is below, and what is below is above, meaning identity, and the idea has been expressed. This is a worldview based on an ancient theology, an eternal philosophy that everything is actually the same thing. When we refer to theology, we mention new theology. In the Tassenalist metaphysical worldview, reality finds its confirmation within itself in all its aspects. Since everything possible will eventually be realized, there is nothing unsaid, nothing undone. Here we encounter Leibniz's idea of the best of possible worlds. That is, everything is possible except for error. Error, as Parmenides said, is something that does not exist. Being is, non-being is not. There is no error. There is an expression of absolute affirmation from René Guénon. That is, infinity, eternity is positive, affirmation, self-affirming. According to this traditional worldview, reality is considered positively inclusive. We can call it a total yes that encompasses everything. However, according to Heydar Jamal, eternity is limited by my knowledge of it. Therefore, infinity affirms itself apophatically by denying this limitation, my search for witness. From this perspective, infinity is not positive inclusive, but negative exclusive. The non-existent is affirmed by being denial. To give a more vivid depiction of reality here, first from Heydar Jamal's New Theology book, let's try to interpret it by reading a part. The absolute object that does not accept an alternative to itself exists. It has a negating nature. It denies everything except itself. By doing so, it allows for the probability of something impossible around it. And it is precisely this impossibility, denied by the absolute object, that exists as the only possible core, cast into the center of this quintuple reality. It is the subject. Let me note that the part written as Kexefel here refers to the absolute object mentioned here. This, however, refers to the subject, meaning a person, noted as subject to a witnessing person. This, the five-layered hierarchy of possibilities of reality, is described. To transition into the description of this reality, first we need to understand what ontological faith is. We need to know, in the thought of unity of existence, generally in pantheistic thought, a person believes that the possible, that is the real thing, exists. The impossible thing does not exist. From this perspective, the thing that exists is the infinite and universal thing. Thus, what is rational, meaning it is virtue. The idea of yes, the idea of affirmation arises here. That is, the realities surrounding a person affirms. Here we see the idea of ontological belief moving from negative to positive and from positive to negative. The hierarchy of possibilities shifts between universal and concrete. To correctly understand this system, that is the anatomy of reality, to visualize the description of reality before our eyes, let's imagine a scene where the person is concretely, we live among things, finite, das auch viel concrete transient things, so do we have to go somewhere? The door to the room is closed and we cannot open it. The door is a concrete thing. It is an object that blocks our way and hinders our movement. A tangible thing that is in our way, meaning it is real. We, that is, as average people, as we live our lives, we encounter real obstacles blocking our way when living in the world. this concrete thing, blocks us, and we feel an ontological belief in this. That is, we cannot imagine anything else being possible. If the door is closed, we can no longer see an alternative to any other way out or any other way to act. And as a result, we are condemned to be trapped inside this room. We feel it. An ontological belief underlies this, meaning this door is closed and must remain closed. We have no other way out. This belongs to a nearby sky. Thought, the sky of fixed stars is naturally a conditional naming. The sky of fixed stars means that all concrete things remain stationary as obstacles to us. It is without alternatives, meaning stationary in this context. And this is the essence of the nearby sky's main. The figure is that it's the possibility of the existence of a specific object, that is the possibility of everything existing as it is. The door exists as it is and blocks our way. We accept it positively based on ontological belief as it is. We can't even imagine an alternative to it. However, everything's a scythe of negation, passes over everything. And everything is denied because everything is transient, everything is temporary, ephemeral. Even the belief we live by is actually denied. This scythe of negation cuts everything down. We deny the nearest sky in the fixed sky. That is, the possibility of the concrete object's existence is denied. It is denied. And we ascend to the second sky, the sky of moving stars. That is the second hierarchy of possibilities. And this is the level. In the sky of moving stars, we talk about the possibility of the existence of any other object instead of a specific object. That is, here an alternative is possible. We can think that instead of this door, there could be a curtain and we could pass through it. Or there may be a way to open this door. Or this door might not exist at all. Could have been. One should say, one object would take the place of another. At this point, possibilities and alternatives come into play. The potential replacement of a specific object emerges. The third sky is the sky of twinkling stars. So it is denied in the second sky, and we rise to the third sky, the sky of twinkling stars. Here, we already discussed the possibility of something not existing. That is, in general, the possibility of an object, for example, a glass on the table. We can consider the possibility of it not existing. First, we see a glass on the table. Later, we think that something else could replace that glass in the second state. In the second state, we can also consider that the glass might not exist at all. That is, it might happen that the glass doesn't exist at all, or maybe this glass once existed, currently exists, and in the future, but will not be present. Everything has a beginning and an end, and every specific object once existed and at some point will not exist. Actually, this is also denied. And then we ascend to the fourth level, the possibility of any object's non-existence instead of a specific object. That is, we already, here we can think not only of any specific object's non-existence, but also of the possibility of any other object's non-existence. Here we are already talking about the sky of dying stars, because at this point we are discussing the fading of all objects and the possibility of the non-existence of all objects is denied. And from here, a negative transition takes place. Finally, the fifth sky, a starless sky, emerges. The starless sky means the impossibility of any object's existence. In other words, the impossibility of existence itself, the discussion of existence being impossible. Here, the realm of all existence, that is, all being, is actually impossible, is being discussed. This means, in general, we can already talk about nothingness here. That is, the absolute object, we reach its limit. But in reality, this itself is denied, rising again from the fifth sky to the first sky. That is, the impossibility of existence, the impossibility of everything that exists, is also denied. We say we live in a realm of existence, but in reality, the existence of this entire realm, impossible. But this possibility itself is also denied. And by being denied, it returns to the sky. And the possibility of a specific object existing arises. That is, existence emerges from nothingness. Something comes into being. And as a result, this circle of the universe turns in this way. What we read from Heydar Jamal's new theology book, the explanation of this part is actually that this absolute object, which accepts no alternatives, possesses a negating nature and denies everything but itself, forming a 5-layered hierarchy of possibilities through denial, thus leaving a likelihood for something impossible apart from itself, in an apophatic manner through such a cycle of revolution. And if we are talking about this, we are talking about possibilities. That is, we are speaking within the boundaries of reality. Whereas within ontological belief, we should only have talked about the possibility of a concrete object's existence. Since everything is negated by the absolute object, meaning if this object didn't exist, if we were the object, we would dissolve and disappear within this realm of possibilities, within the realm of existence in ontological belief, meaning we would blend into infinity like a drop of water mixing into the ocean. Metaphysics cannot investigate this. That is, metaphysics implies the infinite, eternal, something absolute. The topic we are discussing is beyond the ontological beginning. Philosophy cannot talk about this either because philosophy speaks in terms of real existence and categories. This means the paradoxical affirmation of the impossible can only be the subject of theology. In other words, this is a metaphysical scandal. We can consider this as we can envision more clearly with an example. Let's imagine a wall. Imagine a wall in a dark room, and light comes into the room from a window somewhere, and with a small mirror in our hand, we direct that light toward the wall, and on the wall, a little rabbit, meaning a light spot, emerges by moving the mirror, that we can play with the light spot on the wall, on the sofa. Now, the point is that the black amalgam behind the mirror is inserted into the person's interior and turns it into an act of witnessing. It's the point that brings about. So, if this black amalgam were not present, this consciousness, the fact of witnessing, would not exist. Consequently, a person, like a mirror, on the dark wall, we can think of it as an entity. It can reflect to the extent that it reflects that wall. We can talk about the existence of the wall. Otherwise, the wall disappears into the darkness, and with this point placed inside the human, this, the act of witnessing activated by the point of impossibility, ultimately reveals a hierarchy of quintuple possibilities and the absolute object that denies everything. This raises the question that if the universal is negative, meaning as you ascend towards the universal in the hierarchy of possibilities, as we ascend, if there is negativity, if we are talking about an absolute negativity, if concrete and mortal things are positive and temporary, something that can be erased with a single movement of an eraser, a momentary, a fleeting thing. If it is positivity, then how can anything in general exist at all? That is, we encounter the question posed by Heidegger. So, if in the starless sky of the last level, the impossibility of the existence of anything is the most universal, the ultimate truth, then why does anything exist? So, why does something exist instead of nothing? This question is one posed by Heidegger. The conclusion we reach from here is that what we call and describe as reality is not composed of the closed sky surrounded by concrete objects we live with in ontological belief. This reality, however, is not a test called absolute testing by René Guénon. Here, everything is negated. Hence, affirmation recognizes no alternatives. But here we encounter many alternatives. We are faced with a hierarchy of possibilities. The existence of something should have been impossible. However, the possibility of these things and the existence of such alternatives actually mean the existence of reality. And this is related to a crisis taking root within this reality. Heidegger finds the answer to this question in this way. Absolute testing implies homogeneity. However, homogeneity excludes the witness. A little earlier, we used the example of a child running on the beach. Here we were talking about a harmony, a homogeneity. Until the first tragedy, the first drama is experienced, meaning until the child falls and becomes aware of themselves, there was already a general homogeneity. With the child falling, that is the perceiver, the perceived, and the perception with the emergence of difference and disruption of a homogeneity. A star appears in a starless sky. That is, a crack has formed in reality. A crisis is taking root deep within reality. By saying this, indeed, many things are being said, because this is a challenge to the classical metaphysical worldview. At this point, Avicenna and later Ibn Tufail's work called Hayy ibn Yaqzan comes to mind. False. Let me note that this work begins in publication in a memory of publication. According to this work, a child who falls on an island, grows up alone in a room with its surroundings and nature, becomes acquainted with it, and eventually reaches all the conclusions that mankind has reached on his own by understanding his surroundings through his own experiences. He ultimately concludes with the existence of a single God, arrives at the idea. However, naturally, this is the pantheistic understanding of God by the metaphysicians, of course, and this understanding is actually based on an ancient metaphysical worldview. Let me note that this topic is very deep and extensive. I've simply tried to summarize it in very simple language and briefly in this short video as much as possible. Hence, this topic, that is the crisis of reality, has several fields as an introduction to theology. That is the political, social, historical, cultural, that is, explanations should be given in many areas because the results of this is significant. For example, the emergence of a crisis point, let's say God's breath into Adam from his own spirit and teaching him the names of everything, and then as a result of a crisis point arising, a historical stage is set. And on this historical stage, from a finalist theological perspective, emerges. Thus, already on the stage of human history, a being with divine wisdom, its own path, and striving to bring about the end of history, appears. Gains a perspective. He appears on the stage of history as a hero. However, he is not just a hero, he is a hero who has gathered a community around him, forming a congregation. I thank everyone watching